G'day. They call me Ned. I've always found archaeology and the written record fascinating. I like to talk about old stuff, so this is Old Stuff with Ned. Not, as my mate Herbs would have it, Old Ned with Stuff, or Stuff with Old Ned. My mate Herbs is a very, very funny guy. During the last few years, I have been involved with transcribing and editing the handwritten journals of settlers in Van Diemen's Land, now known as Tasmania. After speaking to my friends and family about these projects, at around the time their eyes glaze over, they have made encouraging comments towards recording or filming this research to send out on the intertubes. I'm a bit of a Luddite, so my presentation will be a little rough, as I learn to crawl, walk, and maybe even run with this newfangled technology. Hopefully, you'll find this old stuff as interesting as I have. At about 8:30 a.m. on Wednesday the 30th of January 1828, two young men, Samuel Higgins and George Driver, were launched into eternity, in the parlance of the time, upon the drop, or scaffold, inside the walls of the Hobart Town Jail, situated on the corner of Murray and Macquarie Streets. Their appearance at the Supreme Court, Case 97, on Wednesday the 23rd of January 1828, was before a jury of military officers, who by definition were also gentlemen. One had to be a gentleman to sit upon a jury. There were, on record, 8 witnesses for the prosecution, including David McGee, and 6 for the defence. Found guilty, Higgins and Driver were hanged in execution of the court's sentence of death for the murder of a fellow convict, John Only, at the notorious Macquarie Harbour Penal Settlement. In his final confession, Samuel Higgins stated that about the middle of November, that was 1827, he had bargained £5 of bread with John Only to swap for a delegate day, on which he was to be the cook for the work gang and to gather and keep all the drippings from the cooked meat. This delegate day was considered a day of rest, free from the usual hard labour. On the inhospitable west coast of Van Diemen's Land, hard labour was often performed while wearing leg irons. Arising at 5 a.m, the prisoners toiled at back-breaking work, such as felling and floating huge hue and pine logs down the near-freezing rivers to the Sarah Island settlement, or manning the saw pits until dark with very little food. Some food was grown at the Macquarie Harbour farm, but never enough. Although there were regulations for the issue of rations to the convicts, the Commandant had the power to make adjustments, especially for difficult prisoners. Additionally, supply from Hobart was irregular due to the dangerous ocean voyage, which could take 16 days or longer. Samuel Higgins said that John Only did not keep his bargain and would not return the £5 of bread. For this affront, in a place where food was literally a matter of life or death, Higgins swore to kill Only. These two men, having been adjudged as difficult prisoners, were actually quartered on Grummet's Island, the small island, a steep barren rock about 500 metres east of Sarah Island. After cooking, there were no fires. The men frequently slept in their wet clothes, while gale-force winds swept over the island. Higgins enlisted the aid of George Driver, an absconder recently recaptured and flogged for his troubles, who had determined that his life was no longer worth living. To be hanged for murder was a perfectly acceptable solution. David McGee agreed to lure the victim away from their hut, witness the murder, then make a report of it to the constables. This meant that he would be sent to Hobart Town to swear against Higgins in court, which would give him 2 or 3 months away from Macquarie Harbour in a more civilised prison cell. On the night of Friday, the 30th of November, Higgins lifted his hat, the agreed-upon signal, then went down into the cave. A few minutes later, He heard voices and a scuffle. Emerging from his hidey hole, he saw that John Only was on the ground, with McGee standing above him. Higgins, expressing some reservation, was told by McGee, "Go to work," upon which he drew his knife. Then I, Samuel Higgins, cut his throat, while George Driver held his hands. McGee then took him by the feet and pulled him to the cave. With blood on his clothes, McGee went to the constables to make a report of the murder. There is a mystery. On the 30th of November, 1827, John Only was reported murdered. On the 30th of January, 1828, Samuel Higgins and George Driver were hanged for that murder. Yet, on Saturday the 25th of May, 1833, John Only was charged by the police magistrate in Hobart's town with conveying a cask of spirituous liquors consisting 4 gallons of brandy without a permit. Not having appeared in court, Only was fined £1 plus court costs, and the brandy was confiscated. 5 years after his alleged murder, John Only was alive and in trouble again in Hobart Town. There are a few listings in the Tasmanian Archives under the name of John Only, spelled O-N-E-L-Y. His convict conduct record and other papers inform us that at the Warwick Assizes on the 27th of March 1820, Only was sentenced to transportation for 7 years, leaving Portsmouth on the 10th of July that year in the Caledonia. He arrived after the usual 4-month voyage in Van Diemen's Land on the 17th of November. In Hobart's Town on the 30th of December 1826, he was sentenced to 7 years transportation for stealing in a dwelling house. Being already a convict, the second offence ensured that Only was sent to Macquarie Harbour Penal Station, where the drama unfolded. Another listing records the birth of a male son to John Only, spelled O-N-L-E-Y, of Southarm, and his wife Cecilia Only, née Connor, on the 27th of August 1857. It would appear that John Only did not die, murdered on the small island, but survived to return to Hobart Town. He may have lived happily ever after with Cecilia and his boy at Southarm. If John Only was not murdered, who was? This case intrigued me. I'll leave it with you. And remember, it's just another perfect day in paradise.